let's do a mix, right? We learned on Monday how to solve for a side. Yesterday, we learned how to solve for an angle. Why don't we do a mix? Why don't we do a mix? Now, in this case, I'm going to ask you guys to round it to the nearest 10th. So whether it is an angle or a side, we're going to round it to the nearest 10th. Okay? So let's take a look at number 17. Here I see theta. Okay, so I have to solve for an angle. I see my theta is a corner. I'm given two sides. Let me label the two sides that I have. I have the hypotenuse, right? I have the biggest side. And based on theta, I have the opposite. Remember how to label opposite and adjacent in hypotenuse, right? Opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. Remember how to label those. Okay, so opposite and hypotenuse. I remember that is sine. Remember your acronym. If it helps you, right? Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent, right? Remember SOHCAHTOA? Okay, so sine, I'm going to say sine of theta is equal to 13 over 16. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And I remembered yesterday when we talk about angles, I can move sine over, but I'm going to call it sine inverse. So here, theta is sine inverse of 13 over 16. Let me grab my calculator. Make sure you have it on degrees. So I want to change this to degrees. To begin with, you have a sine, cosine, tangent. So press that second to be able to see it. And I'm going to go sine inverse, open parentheses, and I have 13 divided by 16. Close my parentheses. I press equal. I'm going to round this to 1 decimal place. So in this case, 54.3. So theta is 54.3. So be careful. If I tell you to round it to the nearest whole number, the nearest 10th, you got to read the instructions. Let's take a look at number 18. I have the hypotenuse, and based on theta, okay, theta now is 38 degrees. Based on theta, I have the adjacent. So that means I'm going to do cosine. Now it looks like I'm solving for a side, right? X is a side. So let me call this cosine of 38 degrees is equal to X over 5.6. Now it is nice that X is on top. Remember when it was not, because X could be at the bottom. If X was at the bottom, remember we learned how to flip fractions. That's a trick that I showed you guys. Okay, so now here, let me multiply both sides by 5.6 because this cancel out. So I have that 5.6 times cosine of 38 is equal to X. So let me go to my calculator. And it was 5.6 times cosine. So I had to undo the second. Make sure you use cosine and not cosine inverse. Okay, 5.6 times cosine of 38, close parentheses. I'm going to round it to 1 decimal place. So I'm going to call this 4.4. X equals 4.4. Okay. Probably you guys already noticed. Sometimes you guys are going to do the inverses. Sometimes you're not. All right, look at number 17. We did sine inverse. Number 18, we did not do cosine inverse. We did cosine. Remember, I do inverse when I'm solving for an angle. And I don't do inverse if I'm solving for a side. So let's take a look at number 19. I'm dealing with a side, right? You guys can see X is a side. So you can expect I'm not going to deal with the inverse. I have the hypotenuse. And based on theta, I have the opposite, right? X is the opposite. So opposite hypotenuse, I'm going to be using sine. So I have that sine of 31 degrees is equal to x over 7.6. Okay, cool. I like the x on top. Luckily, we got it on top. If we don't, if the x is at the bottom, don't forget, you have two fractions and flip them. You want x on top. Because I'm going to multiply both sides by 7.6. So these cancel out. So I have that 7.6 times sine of 31 is equal to x. So let me grab my calculator. And I have 7.6 times sine of 31, close parentheses. It is equal to 3.9 because I'm going to round it to one decimal place. So 3.9. Lastly, let's take a look at number 20. That question mark, let me call it theta because it's an angle. Okay, let me call it theta. I don't have the hypotenuse, right? The blank side is the hypotenuse, but I see 31 is the opposite and 33 is the adjacent. So opposite and adjacent, I know I'm going to be using tangent. So I'm going to have that tangent of theta is 31 over 33, right? Tangent is opposite over adjacent. On one tangent, I want to move it over, but remember, I got to call it inverse. So I'm going to say theta is tan inverse of 31 over 33. So let me grab my calculator here. So now I need inverse, so make sure you press second. So tan inverse, oh, let me clear this out. Tan inverse 31 divided by 33, close parentheses, press equal. I have to round it to one decimal place. So I'm going to call this 43.2. Theta is 43.2. Nice.